Today, I'm going to, so I'm Tony Underwood. I'm presenting some material that's with my colleague in my department, Emily Marshall, that describes a project that we do here in our advanced econometrics class. And I will talk first a little bit about our motivation for doing this project the way we do it and teaching these reproducible research methods along the way. And then talk a little bit about what we actually do in the project, why we do it, and talk how we can share some of our project resources with you and why we think they're helpful. So first, in terms of motivation, the motivation is really twofold. Our first motivation comes from that actually doing economics, doing economic research is one of the best ways to get students to understand how to think like an economist. And as we heard from Janice earlier, part of thinking like an economist is learning how to write like an economist. And as many of you have mentioned in the chat, we do have these disciplinary conventions that do differ based on what audience we are reading, what audience will be reading this content. So we know that economic research itself has become increasingly empirical, and that when you're doing empirical research, both the American Statistical Association and says that you have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility to promote the sharing of data and methods and make this documentation for replication available. As many of you probably know, the American Economic Association recently appointed its first data editor and ramped up requirements for reproducibility and data availability. So that was our first motivation, that doing economic research is important, and that research is becoming increasingly empirical and needs to be more transparent. The second motivation, as many of you suggested already, is that writing helps students learn, in particular writing how we use writing in our discipline to promote learning. And so there is some evidence of this in the teaching literature. And what McGoldrick pointed out over 10 years ago was that while many economics departments have formal writing requirements, it's not that common for departments to offer courses dedicated to the research process or offer explicitly what we would consider research methods courses that are teaching the process of research and writing in economics. So that's what ultimately led us to develop a kind of process-oriented approach to teaching writing and to teaching econometrics in this course. So that leads us to our learning objectives, right? The big one, be able to conduct this applied empirical research. I will put these up here, and I will try not to read them completely, but we use Stata. You, of course, could use whatever statistical software you wanted in this project. But they need to learn Stata, some data management skills and coding practices for reproducibility. They need to know how to put their research question in the context of the existing literature through a literature review. One of the things I won't have time to talk about here is that we spend a lot of time talking about the purpose and structure of a literature review in economics, which is, I think, markedly different than how it's used in other disciplines. And then, of course, how to pull all of that together into a well-developed research paper. The big thing here is on doing, right? They're having to do this. And the way we structured this process to facilitate students actually being successful in this endeavor was by sequencing the project, as I'll talk more about in a second, and requiring this replication documentation, right? And the idea here is to slow students down in a good way. What we had, before we kind of overhauled this project and implemented this reproducible structure, what we saw both in the context of an empirical project for econometrics and in writing more generally is that students are just in a really, really big hurry to get to the final product, right? There's this rush, I always called it the rush to regress, right? They want to get to that regression, they want to get the data in, they want to run the regression, they want to get to that final paper, right? And in doing so, a lot of errors can be made, and you lose a lot, and the papers themselves ended up being underdeveloped. So having these reproducible requirements and having the progress sequenced really helps in this regard. So what we do to make this possible is we have really detailed prompts at each phase. Yes, this is super time consuming. There's a high fixed cost, but a lower marginal cost because you have these rubrics to help you provide feedback along the way. And of course, that's one of the reasons we're doing this, and I'm here today, is that we are making all these available to you. So, as I said, why we do this way, they focus too much on the product. By redirecting their focus to the process, we end up improving the final product. And so they learn to teach research and writing as a recursive process, kind of a tool of discovery, that it's not a linear thing. You start the paper, you finish the paper. That research itself is a learning experience. And this is how most economists actually operate in our own research. Okay, so as I said, we do this through sequencing with detailed prompt and requiring that replication documentation. Here's the replication folder we require. This is an adaptation of the TIER protocol put together by Project TIER out of Haverford College. They have an original data folder, an analysis data folder, a command files folder, and a documents folder. And over the course of the semester, we can talk more about this in the Q&A perhaps, but what we do is have a shared folder and students upload components of this project over the course of the semester in what amounts to basically 7 different phases over the course of a 15-week semester, 16-week semester. This is how that ends up looking. So early on, they get their formal structure set up and where they're going to be saving their work. They develop an annotated bibliography, they develop a research question, and you can see then the different tasks as we progress through the semester: a proposal, a metadata guide, a literature review, their data and methods section, the results section, and then of course pulling it all together at the end with the final project folder, which includes the final paper, a README file, and all of the other documentation necessary so that I, in grading it, can click through their do files, execute them all, and reproduce the regressions and the results that they've developed. Okay, so finally, well, here, just because I think this is a fun figure, the idea of this paper was to keep them here, right? This is what we call the recursive part of the project, right? And slowing them down in processing their data, finding sources and analyzing them, developing the research question, and developing a literature review and a data and methods section that are derived from both what the existing literature says and what data availability constraints mandate. Before they get to estimating that final model, and they push to then for the project becoming linear, developing those conclusions and writing the final paper. That's the idea, kind of keep them in that early recursive space longer so that the ideas and the analysis that they develop are more thoughtful by the end. Okay, so one important component to this is that the students cannot view these different phases and these different deadlines as drafts. So we do grade each of these final components. This is kind of how this is written in my syllabus for the class. What you'll notice firstly is that this is a big deal of the course, right? I do teach content in here. We're teaching advanced econometric methods in this course. They have other workshops and homeworks, but this project makes up nearly half of their course grade, 45% of the course grade. That 45% is allocated across these 7 different components. The actual final product, the research paper and the final project folder is only 20% of their grade. Thanks, Carlos. I'm wrapping up here. So what we do is we use rubrics, which personally, I resisted using for a long time, but they do make things more straightforward. They make our expectations transparent to the students. And it means that our feedback is coordinated with some of the practice activities we do, which are embedded in some of our workshops and homeworks over the course of this semester. Okay, so finally, as I said, the prompts and rubrics I've made available online. I'm actually due to update them with the most recent versions soon. They're adaptable. They are password protected, so students can't go grab them whenever they want. You can email me for access. I'm happy to share them with you. There's a published version of this work that Emily and I put together in JEE in late 2019 that was published. I was certainly happy to share a copy with that for you if you don't have access. Thank you.